Well, welcome everyone. Having too few chairs is better than having too many. If there are any chairs that have backpacks or anything like that on them, it'd be a good idea to take them off, because the chairs are now valuable real estate. And if you have a mobile device with its ringer on, I'd ask you to put it on vibrate or
including
silence. Okay, well, this is the second in our series of lunchtime talks on topics in Jewish philosophy. And very pleased to welcome Professor Kenneth Seeskin to our midst. Let me tell you something about him. Kenneth Seeskin is the Philip M. and Ethel Klutznick Professor of Jewish Civilization at Northwestern University, from which he narrowly escaped yesterday in a brief window through a very turbulent
the grace of God.
After receiving his PhD from Yale in 1972, he joined the faculty of Northwestern and has remained there ever since. He served for nearly 20 years as chair of the philosophy department, and with the start of the 2010-2011 academic year, is serving as the chair of the religious studies department. He's won several teaching awards since coming to Northwestern, and served as the Charles Deering McCormick Professor of Teaching Excellence from 1995 to 98. Seeskin is best known for his interpretation and defense of the rationalist tradition in Jewish philosophy, including such figures as Maimonides, Spinoza, and Hermann Cohen. His most recent books include the Cambridge Companion to Maimonides, Cambridge University Press, 2005, Maimonides on the Origin of the World, Cambridge University Press, 2005. You know, when I saw that both of those came out at the same time a couple of years ago, I just did a back. Such productivity. Autonomy in Jewish Philosophy, also Cambridge University Press, 2001, and Searching for a Distant God, The Legacy of Maimonides, Oxford University Press, 2000. And that latter book was awarded the Koret Jewish Book Award in 2001. And Ken is also co-editor with Judith Baskin of the Cambridge Guide to Jewish History, Religion, and Culture. Is that correct?
That's been out for 2 months.
His published articles deal with religious themes such as studies in the book of Job, the meaning of the Holocaust, negative theology, the concept of holiness, and recent studies on the role of reason in Jewish philosophy, the role of miracles in Jewish philosophy, and the Greek background to Jewish philosophy. His bio says he's currently working on a book on messianism. I think that book is mostly done since my class read the manuscript of it over the past couple of weeks. So should we put it into the past tense?
I don't have I'm waiting for the powers that be to pronounce on the book, so I don't, that's about all I can say.
All right. So it's a book on messianism that takes up issues pertaining to evil, rationality, and the philosophy of history. And having read it, I can tell you much else. So without further ado, we'll hear from Professor Seeskin, who will talk for about 50 minutes, and then we'll have some time for Q&A.
Well, thank you, Alan, and thank you all for coming. Let's plunge right in, and if you have a handout, we can begin right off the bat with a quotation from Maimonides. This comes from the end of the Mishnah Torah, more or less the rhetorical climax of the Mishnah Torah. And he says the following: King Messiah will arise and restore the kingdom of David to its former state and original sovereignty. he or she who does not believe in a restoration or does not wait the coming of the Messiah denies not only the teachings of the prophets, but also those of the law of Moses, our teacher. Okay? Now, there are a lot of passages where Maimonides is very, very confusing. Okay? In fact, I earn a paycheck every month by taking confusing passages and trying to make sense of them. This, though, is a passage where he's extremely clear, it seems to me, if not elegant. And we are told, for example, that this is not just a philosophic statement in the form of the Anima Amin. We are told that Jews were led to the gas chambers repeating the words of Maimonides on the coming of the Messiah. So this is a central part of our religion. Now, we should make clear at the outset that he has a sharp distinction. So if he makes a distinction, we need to make it too. He has a sharp distinction between Yamot HaMashiach, the days of the Messiah, and Olam Haba, the world to come. So we can't confuse them. He's talking about the days of the Messiah. That's something that he believes is going to happen in time on this earth by human agents. Okay, this is not the world to come that we're talking about here. But look, as is sometimes the case with Maimonides, what he'll do, he'll give you a passage of just sort of simple, abbreviated elegance that seems to ignore a whole tradition of confusion and complication. Okay, so if we look on the sources in which he's drawing, the picture is much more complicated than he leads us to believe in this simple quote. Okay, so if we were to do a brief history, in 50 minutes I can't do the whole thing. We have to be here for a long time. But look, you don't have to dig very far in prophetic literature to see that their Judaism has all kinds of apocalyptic statements about what's going to come. Amos says that, for example, the days of the Lord is not going to be a very happy time. It's going to be bitter, it's going to be awful, there's going to be a famine, there's going to be no light is going to shine, etc. Jeremiah, whose name is practically synonymous sometimes with apocalyptic visions, the earth is going to be waste and void, the heavens will shed no light, the mountains will quake, cities will lie in ruins, disaster will follow upon disaster. There are many more passages one could cite. Now granted, in prophetic literature, typically after this cataclysm, things are going to get better. But before things can get better, there has to be some kind of disruption, some kind of, as I said, the sun isn't going to shine, mountains are going to quake, the oceans will dry up, etc., etc. Maimonides doesn't refer to any of that, at least not in the passage that we have. That's not the way he sees the coming of the Messiah. We'll ask why in a few minutes. But passage after passage, and if we look at what he says, it's almost as if that stuff isn't there. At any rate, the apocalyptic passages are what led Gershom Scholem to say, there's a famous quote that's on your handout, Jewish messianism is in its origin and by its nature a theory of catastrophe. Okay, why catastrophe? Well, because I think what the vision of the prophets here is that the evil that human beings have done is so great and is so manifest that the only way we're going to get out of it is for some kind of divinely ordained or divinely caused cataclysmic event. Okay, so one could say this, I think. if you look at these apocalyptic passages, what they seem to be denying is that we can get out of the hole in which we found, that the human race can get out of the hole in which it now finds itself by steady step-by-step progress. In other words, that we're going to somehow bootstrap ourselves out of the hole in which we find it. And what they're saying, no, it's going to take something really awful to do this. And what's going to result after the cataclysm, often what's going to result is a world completely unlike this one, with really a kind of, almost a kind of utopian vision. Now, if you think about this all philosophically, I think we can say that messianism presents us with a very serious problem. And the problem is this. Look, on the one hand, we need the idea of hope for a better future. We need the idea that human existence is not tragic. We need the idea that somehow in the end evil isn't going to win out. If you take that away, I think not only would you destroy much of Judaism, I think you would destroy really much of our sense of ourselves as human beings. It's often said that Judaism's greatest contribution to Western civilization is monotheism. I don't want to deny that in any way, but I would add that right up there with monotheism, as far as I see it, is the ability to articulate the vision of something better. The ability to say that evil doesn't win, that eventually goodness wins out in the end. This is not just, as I say, a central part of Judaism, it's a central part of Western culture. All right, let's take an example. Take as my example a great Western thinker, Immanuel Kant, not a Jew. A prime example of somebody who was not a Jew, but who should have been. Someday, if you want, have me back, I'll give you a lecture. People who were not Jews but who should have been, followed by people who were Jews but who should not have been. Okay, but we have that group too. Anyway, Kant, writing in the 18th century, says that the three fundamental philosophic questions, the three most basic questions of human existence are: what can I know? What should I do? What can I hope for? Now, if you had gone to Plato and Aristotle, you're going back to the Greeks, and said, well, the first question is, what can I know? They would have understood what that was about, because they themselves wrote whole volumes on the question of what can I know. If you said, well, the second question is, what should I do? There too, Socrates spent his whole life taking people out of the marketplace to talk about virtue. So that would be a question they were comfortable with. If you went to a Greek audience and you said the third question, what can I hope for? I think they would regard that as peculiar. Yes, they have a word for it, but it wouldn't have the centrality that it has for him. And if you had, why is it so central for Kant, and it wouldn't have been for other secular thinkers? Answer would take us back to the prophets. And the idea of hope is so central to the prophetic vision. Kant is the inheritor of that tradition, and that's why he can take it for granted. But that's really, I think, a major Jewish contribution. All right, so on the one hand, we need the idea of hope for a better future. On the other hand, there's something unreal about hope, and there's something very dangerous about it. Notice that when we needed them, when the chips are really down, is when we are most susceptible to folly. It's when conditions are terrible that we are susceptible to snake oil salesmen, right? To people making all kinds of wild and grandiose promises. And if you don't believe that, go home tonight and turn on the TV and look at the political ads, right? Because that, our times are not good. Everybody knows that. And what you will see is people from both parties making wild and unsustainable promises. You will see people saying that if my opponent is elected, the whole world is going to go under, and if I'm elected, we're going to cure everything, and it's going to be a whole new era. Okay? Don't believe it. So what do? We have on the one hand one thing, on the one hand the other. Then there's also, of course, the problem of messianism. Another problem is the identification of the Messiah. Here, if you want a homework assignment, all you have to do, you don't have to read a thick scholarly book. Just go on to Wikipedia. Just look up a Jewish Messiah, okay? And there's a list of about 35 false messiahs, okay? Including Jesus and the latest entry from Crown Heights. But look, beyond the question of getting the wrong person, actually I should say about false messiahs, my mother's maiden name was Shaps, S-C-H-A-P-S. Ethel Shaps, that's the side of the family that I take after. I'm a Galicianer. I strongly suspect that Shaps comes from Shabbatai, that the family changed its name. I can't prove it, but I strongly suspect it, which is to say that I strongly suspect that as far back as the 17th century, the family was betting on a losing horse. But okay. But look, beyond just the question, have we got the right person? There is the danger of what we can call messianic fervor. In other words, it isn't just that when we get the wrong person that we've made a mistake, but that often the consequences are horrible. The consequences are tragic. The consequences of the Bar Kokhba revolution in Judea were devastating. Were disastrous. So messianism stirs up hopes and gets through, but sometimes focusing them in the wrong direction. There is, in addition, the question of what kind of a model do we want for the Messiah? Do we want to think of the Messiah as a warrior or a scholar? What is this really going to be? And this all has to be clarified. Now, here I have to say that there are people in this room, probably the majority of people who know more about the rabbinic tradition than I, but let me simply say that as I read it, the rabbinic tradition is very ambivalent about messianism. They can't get rid of it, and they don't want to get rid of it, because again, there's something fundamental about the idea of hope. On the other hand, they were well aware of what happened with Bar Kokhba. They were well aware of the devastation. They were well aware of the dangers of messianic fervor. And so we have a variety of passages, some seeming to espouse one thing, some seeming to espouse something quite different. If you look on your handout, there's a very famous saying here. There are apocalyptic passages in the Talmud, but it's a very famous saying, let the Messiah come and let me not live to see it. There's going to be too much devastation before, and I just as soon keep things the way they are. All right? But there's also naturalism. The sole difference between the present and the days of the Messiah will be delivery from the servitude to foreign powers. There are passages that suggest that the Messiah will come when things are supremely good. There are passages that suggest that the Messiah will come when things are supremely bad. there's at least one way to suggest the Messiah is going to come when things are either supremely good or supremely bad. It's very hard to focus here and find, I would say, a single doctrine. And that's why, if we go back to that quotation from Maimonides, you can see there's all of this complexity, and he just comes down on the side of naturalism as if that's the only reasonable alternative. He's aware of the apocalyptic references, but he more or less just simply wants to push them away. So let's take a passage that's very important for Maimonides, Ecclesiastes 3:14. Whatever God does shall be forever. Okay, in other words, what this comes from the Guide of the Perplexed. What Maimonides is arguing in that passage is, if God had to intervene in the future by bringing about a cataclysm, then there would have been something wrong, something seriously wrong with the original creation. It would not have been worthy of the Creator. The only kind of creation that would be worthy of the Creator would be one in which a cataclysm of this nature is not needed. Okay? In other words, you can think of it this way. If you buy a car, suppose you get a recall notice. Unless you get your car fixed, you're going to be in a horrendous accident. The brakes are going to give out or something. That would be a sign of the inferiority of the manufacturer. What Maimonides is saying, there's going to be no recall notice anymore on the universe. There'll be no divinely ordained cataclysm. It's good just in and of itself in the way that it is, and therefore this kind of divine intervention, so far from establishing the perfection of God, would in fact establish God's imperfection. Now, says Maimonides, again from the passage in the Mishnah Torah, do not think that the Messiah will have to perform signs and wonders, bring anything new into being, revive the dead, or do similar things. It just isn't so. Now, if you know Maimonides, you know this passage creates a problem because when he says not going to revive the dead, this led to a major controversy. Did Maimonides believe in resurrection? There are passages where he clearly says that he does. This passage indicates that either he doesn't or he doesn't assign it a very important role. That's a subject for another discussion. But as of the passage at hand, what he seems to be saying is, look, no miracles. There's going to be nothing like that. And if you want, you could see this in some ways as an anti-Christianity passage, because of course if you pick up the gospel, Jesus works one miracle after another after another. And Maimonides is saying, look, that's not the way to identify the Messiah. Now, this sort of naturalism is emphasized even more because what Maimonides claims is there will be no change in human nature. We will not become angelic beings. That's not what the days of the Messiah is about. We're going to be fundamentally the same kind of beings that we are now. There's going to be no, or let me express it positively. In the days of the Messiah, says Maimonides, there will still be rich and poor. There will still be strong and weak. There will still be disease that we will have to take care of, and social problems that we will have to take care of. Okay, well then, what are we hoping for? I mean, what is it that the days of the Messiah are going to give us? We're still going to have to work for a living until, of course, we are retired. It'll be easier to make a living, and we will have more time to devote to study. But if you think that the streets will somehow clean themselves miraculously, or that there will be miraculous healing of the sick, or rivers flowing with wine, or all the rest of the stuff, don't hold your breath. It's not going to happen. Okay. The sages and the prophets, again from the Mishnah Torah. The sages and the prophets did not long for the days of the Messiah so that Israel might exercise domination over the world. In other words, we're not waiting for this in order that Israel can sort of have a kind of triumphalism where it rules over the heathens. That's not the point. Or be exalted by the nations, or that it might eat, drink, and rejoice. In other words, don't think of the days of the Messiah in hedonistic terms, where it isn't just going to be one big banquet after another. Their aspiration, in other words, the aspiration of the sages and the prophets, was that Israel be free to devote itself to the law and its wisdom. What we're really going to do in the days of the Messiah is have the time to study. There will be peace with the other nations, and because we are not devoting so much of our energy to warfare or to wealth, we will be able to devote much more of our energy to study, both study of the Torah and study of secular subjects. The temple will be restored. But again, the point of this religion is that we will be able to worship and study as God originally intended us to do. Therefore, I say, if you would like to see a picture of what the days of the Messiah will be like for Maimonides, you can see exactly what it's going to be like. Here's all you have to do. I mean this in all seriousness. When the lecture's over, walk out the door and look around you. Because if he's right, in the days of the Messiah, the whole world is going to be one big research institute. That's what it's going to be. And if you say, well, no, I want the wealth and the banquets and the domination, then he thinks you've missed the point of Judaism. You've missed it by a country mile. Now this raises a question. This is a question raised by Gershom Scholem. Is this conception restorative or utopian? In other words, what is this dichotomy is one that Gershom Scholem gives us. And you could see, Scholem classifies Maimonides as the prime example of a restorative conception of the Messiah. Why? Because the temple will be rebuilt, sacrifices will be conducted once again, there will be no cosmic changes, and there will be no new revelation. Nothing new will be revealed. According to Maimonides, should anyone come and offer a new revelation, that would be knockdown, drag-out evidence that that person is a false prophet, therefore not the Messiah, and if you want to be literal, for him, should be put to death by strangulation. Okay? So there is no new revelation. Okay? But wait a minute. Yes, there's a sense in which it's restorative, but hold on. Isn't there something deeply utopian about the vision of the whole world following the lead of Israel and devoting itself to study and worship? After all, when did that ever happen? I mean, let's go back in our history to take the generation of the Exodus. Here they witnessed the greatest miracles of all time. They had the greatest prophet who will ever live as their leader. Did they devote themselves to study and worship? Not according to the story that we have. And of course, even Moses, despite being the greatest prophet, was unable to make peace with the other nations. That wasn't his role. What the Messiah will do is accomplish is something that Moses didn't, which is to make peace. There is something deeply utopian about that as well, and it raises a question which people have put to me on several occasions, which goes like that. Look, Seeskin, do you think Maimonides really believed that this was going to happen? Really? That the whole world will be a research institute led by Israel? Which, of course, my answer is yes. I think he thought that was actually going to happen. Now, at this point, I have to introduce a bit of a small tangent. Another view of messianism, which was held by Kant. Go back to Kant. It was held by Hermann Cohen. And it was held by my mentor, the late Stephen Schwarzschild. And that view, you can see on the handout, is this, that the Messiah is never actually going to come. That the Messiah is always going to be in the process of coming, but never actually arrive. That messianism, the days of the Messiah, you can think of this to use a mathematical image, which all three of these thinkers used. If you remember your high school algebra, just remember the graph paper, remember the sloping curve. It gets closer and closer to the axis, but it never touches. The touch is infinitely far off. In that sense, the Messiah is never actually going to rise, never actually going to walk the face of the earth. He will always, or she will be just in the process of coming. That, in that sense, what these thinkers argued was that messianism is a target. It's something that we aim for. In Kant's terms, it's an ideal. It's a moral ideal, but not something that we can ever actually achieve. Humanity, according to this view, will never actually perfect itself in the sense of having a true days of the Messiah. It will be a constant aspiration. Now, what I want to suggest to you is that view has its strengths. Notice, for example, one thing it does not have to worry about is who is the Messiah. The question of identification never arises because, in a sense, the Messiah is infinitely deferred. I don't think that's Maimonides' view. I want to persuade you that's not his view. Even though Cohen and Schwarzschild thought it was. Okay, and here's my argument. I've compressed this as best I can into the following 5 or 6 steps, but let's see how this works. Okay, here's the way I see Maimonides. Step 1. Maimonides asserts repeatedly that the Torah is valid for all time. Of course, the Torah says that about itself in the book of Deuteronomy. So step 1 is just that the Torah is valid for all time. Step 2. Maimonides also asserts that the Torah contains numerous concessions to human nature as we now know it. That is to say, the Torah contains numerous commandments, where in effect what God has done is to say, you know what, this isn't absolutely necessary, but if you people, I think you need it, and therefore I'm going to include it in the Torah. Okay, to understand why Maimonides thought that, let me just draw a distinction here, as Maimonides sees it, the difference between the Judaism of Abraham and the Judaism of Moses. Okay? According to Maimonides, this is not held by all of the rabbinic tradition, but according to Maimonides, Abraham did not have the Torah. According to Maimonides, Abraham's religion was founded on philosophical arguments. Abraham, according to Maimonides, proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that God existed and that God was one. And these proofs, says Maimonides, were passed on to the patriarchs. And then during the Egyptian captivity, Abraham's monotheism was completely forgotten. So, according to Maimonides, Israel adopted the paganism of its captors during the period in Egypt. Okay, why then, in a certain sense, what Maimonides is saying is Abraham's religion was a failure. Why was it a failure? Because it was based on reason alone. It was based on pure philosophic arguments. Now comes the religion of Moses. This represents for Maimonides a serious improvement, because in addition to having the first two commandments, which assert the existence and unity of God, Moses' religion contains festivals, days of worship, places of worship, the specifics of how to worship. Of course, animal sacrifice. Now, why would God need animal sacrifice? Why do we need animal sacrifice in a monotheistic religion? Well, says Maimonides, God didn't really need it, but the people did. They needed some sense of ceremony. They needed some sense of spectacle. They needed some sense of days of observance, because they couldn't get by on philosophy alone. Yes, Abraham could, but the average Israelite could not. And therefore, Moses' religion, which is to say Torah, provided a whole way of life in a way that Abraham's didn't. And that way of life, says Maimonides, is full of concessions to us. Okay, we don't have animal sacrifice anymore, but for him, prayer is a concession to us. God doesn't need to be praised every day, but we need to do it. We need reminders. We need festivals. We need celebrations. We need days of contrition. We need practices. We need hymns. We need standardized prayer. We need all of this, lest we forget the religion as our ancestors did in Egypt. May not be the standard view. This is his view. If that's right, then most of the religion that we practice is, in effect, a kind of concession to the needs of really existing human beings. We need to repent, we need to pray, we need to read Shabbat, etc., etc. Therefore, putting these together, I suggest to you, if human nature is not going to change, which he believes, if the Torah is valid for all time, which he believes, then concessions will always be necessary. We are always going to need this stuff. I'm not saying, and he's not saying it's a concession, therefore don't observe it. Au contraire, exactly the opposite. Just understand what it is and why it was given. So I put it to you that as Maimonides sees the days of the Messiah, we are not going to turn ourselves into angelic creatures. We are still going to need all of the stuff that our ancestors needed in ancient, the animal sacrifice, so we have now prayer. But this sort of thing will still be needed. We're not going to become angelic. We're not going to become semi-divine. hence, as I read Maimonides, the quest or the striving for the days of the Messiah is not infinite. It is not an infinitely far off. It is not, it almost sounds like Lo Bashamayim. It's not infinitely far off. It's not too difficult. It was originally designed with us and our proclivities and strengths and weaknesses in mind. In that sense, it is not thoroughly utopian. Again, it's not. We're not going to be living in an earthly paradise. That's the wrong way to look at it. And finally, as I read him, and this is controversial, but here's my reading. No superhuman effort will be needed to achieve the days of the Messiah. That is to say, it is within our power to achieve. It is within our power to make peace. It is within our power to devote ourselves to study and worship. We don't need a catechism. We don't need miracles. We don't need rivers flowing with wine and all the rest of it. Conclusion. In fact, his vision of the days of the Messiah, I would say, is neither completely restorative nor completely utopian. I think there are aspects of both, but ultimately neither category is really, I think, an accurate description of what he said. Let's be very clear. Maimonides is not in the business, this is not Las Vegas. He's not in the business of giving odds. Okay, so if you were to ask him, all right, well, what are the odds that this, he has no answer. That's not the point. His point is rather that it's possible. That's the point, the philosophical. It is within the power of human beings to achieve. He does not want you to calculate when it's going to happen, although heaven knows many people have tried, by virtue of the stars, by virtue of numerology, he himself in certain passages even allows himself to do it. I wish he hadn't, but I think his considered view is don't try to work for it, don't rely on numerology or astrology or anything of the sort. If all of this is right, then look at the implication of what he's saying, which is this. We currently have everything we need to do this. What's lacking is the effort. We have what we need. Again, no new revelation, no miracles. And therefore, if we have not achieved it, the fault lies with us. It's our fault. Because we could do it. Now, as Alan indicated, I'm working on a book on this whole subject, and I'm going to get torn to shreds tonight by graduate students who've read a draft of the book. I don't know the exact status of the book. I hope it will be out at some point in the near future. If you don't want to read the book, if it's too much or too abstract, too much philosophy, then let me simply say you can wait for the movie to come out, and maybe you will enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we have some time for questions, and I'm sure we have people willing to ask them. Matt.
You mentioned that Stephen Schwarzschild was your mentor, and he had a certain view, which you compared to mathematical graph.
Mm-hmm.
Was there ever a point that you know, since he was your mentor, did you always feel that he was not correct about how he was interpreting Maimonides' understanding of the Messianic time?
Yeah, let me just say, Stephen, he was never my formal teacher. But he more or less adopted me and had a profound impact on my thought. there is something attractive about that view. I don't want to suggest that you know, like my mother would used to say, you know, fat, you know, when she didn't like something, you know, brush it off with paper. Now, there is something attractive about that view, and what's attractive about it is, first, we don't have to worry about the problem of identification. Second of all, what I think is even more attractive about it is this. That view is based on the idea that anything that human beings do is necessarily going to be imperfect. In other words, what it's saying is whatever we achieve or whatever we accomplish is always in some sense or other going to fall short of the standard. And if you want to go back into history and ask yourself what's motivating that view, one of the things that's motivating that view, if you remember from your college philosophy classes, was Plato. Because if you remember, what Plato argues again and again is there are ideal standards that are known to reason, but that everything in this life will always necessarily fall short of the ideal. Okay? So I don't want to, I mean, there's a long philosophic tradition behind this. There are certainly aspects of Platonism in Maimonides. My only claim here is that as far as the days of the Messiah go, as far as that aspect of Maimonides, I just don't think that was his view. I just don't think that view can be sustained textually. I mean, there is finally, like he said, there's a psychological problem with that view. And Schwarzschild himself, at one point in his career, saw what that problem was. And it's this. The Messiah and the idea of the coming of a Messiah is supposed to give us hope. But if what you tell me is that the Messiah is infinitely far off and will never actually arrive, then I don't have hope. What I have, it seems to me, is the guarantee of relative failure. Because no matter how hard I try, I'm going to keep failing. Now, to me, that sounds a little bit too much like Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill. And if you'll remember from Greek mythology, Sisyphus was a tragic figure. Now, I take Judaism to be saying, speaking very broadly, not just broad brushstrokes, like a spray can, right? Speaking, broadly speaking, I take Judaism to be saying human life is not tragic. We are not just pushing a rock up a hill that we're always going to fall short. It doesn't work that way. This is a different vision. I hope I'm not doing him an injustice. As I say, my respect for him is profound, but on this issue, I have to argue. Yes, sir.
Well, this is related to what you said before, but I was making it sharper. To me, it's more irrational to believe in his stuff than to
Maimonides.
Yes, because it really seems to say human nature will not change. So I'm trying to imagine, you're living at the time of the Messiah. People are the same as they always are. The Messiah gets divorced, God knows why. People are still the same. What keeps it going? Because still more people will want to go to baseball games than study at the seminary. I mean, you really expect somehow through human nature, everybody will all of a sudden stop making war. And
He believes that our, if I can speak this way, our essence and our ultimate goal and aspiration is to perfect our minds. Now, what he's saying is, at some point, we have to believe that at some point humanity is going to wake up to that. Now, again, there are going to be rich and poor. There may, as I said, there are going to be social problems to deal with. Perhaps there will still be crime. It's not that we're living where everybody is walking around and is just, you know, in a, as I say, an angel. We still have issues. Yes, there will still be divorces, there will still be wills, there will still be courts of law, there will still be everything that the Torah gives us.
There'll be no wars.
There will be no wars, and we will devote ourselves to now one caveat, maybe to make it a little more palatable. He does not, Maimonides does not believe that the days of the Messiah necessarily will go on forever. In other words, some people believe that once we arrive there, that's it, bingo, we're never falling down again. That's not his view, for better or worse. The Messiah himself, according to Maimonides, will die a natural death at some point. Will humanity still devote itself to the right things rather than the wrong things? We can hope so, but, says Maimonides, there is no guarantee. Don't assume that it just extends indefinitely. That is to say, don't assume that we can just coast. It's not like winning the Nobel. A friend of mine just won the Nobel Prize. That okay, that's it. You pat yourself on the back. You retire. Your career is over. You made it. Cool. It doesn't work. Not good. Thank you.
That's okay.
Yeah, there's something that confuses me with presentation, which your comment right now actually brings us back to, that I'd like to ask about, comment on. You began by insisting on a distinction between Yemot HaMashiach and Olam Haba, right? Saying that you're going to be speaking about Messianic days and not about Maimonides' view and the others else's view regarding Olam Haba. The classical sources that Maimonides will have inherited made a very clear distinction between those two stages. And what's crucial in connection to your latter comment, and for a lot of other things that you said as well, is that in the Talmud and before the Talmud, when the Messianic idea begins to develop in these, apocryphal intertestamental literature and then into rabbinic literature, it's perfectly clear that whatever the qualities of the Messianic age are, it is not the final stage of history. It is the penultimate stage of history, that after Yemot HaMashiach comes Olam Haba. Right? And the fantastic stuff, the truly fantastic stuff, describes not the Messianic age, but the world to come. So, for example, your latter comment right now, some assume that the Messianic age will go on and so forth, but Maimonides is reflecting, by claiming the Messiah is going to die, is the perfectly standard classical view that the Messianic age will come to its end, and only after its
Could
end...
come to its end.
No, will come to its end. I mean, the classical rabbinic sources assume, as far as I know, without exception, that these are two distinct stages of history. The Messianic age will end because it is not the final stage of history, and thereafter will come Olam Haba, which will be far more fantastic, and reasonably, in the interpretation of the earlier tradition, many of the most fantastic descriptions apply not to Yemot HaMashiach, which not only scattered opinions, but actually very mainstream rabbinic opinions assume are going to be relatively naturalistic. And the more fantastic stuff overall belongs to Olam Haba.
I don't want to dispute your reading of the tradition.
Right.
I would say I don't think that's the way he saw it. That is to say, he read a lot of the fantastic rivers flowing with wine and people picking the gold and diamonds and so on out of the earth and not having gold. He thought that a lot of that was people talking about the days of the Messiah.
But he makes a very clear distinction.
That he
between
says
those two stages.
it can't happen, but he sees himself as correcting people for making this conclusion. As for Olam Haba for him is not in time. It's not a historical period.
What is it?
We don't have a body in Olam Haba, according to Maimonides. We lose our body. The body perishes. The only thing that survives is the rational soul. We are not in a social or political context. The Torah does not apply.
But at the end of time,
And Olam Haba. No, don't think of Olam Haba. For him, don't think of it temporary.
But in other words,
Let me just say this. As he reads it, we don't need the days of the Messiah to enter Olam Haba. And you don't even have to be Jewish to enter Olam. It's a purely rational, it's nothing but endless, eternal, timeless, rational.
Which happens when?
If for those who've died, they're there now. Their rational soul has survived in another realm. Aristotle's soul is there, Moses' soul, the souls of the sages were there. It's
I
not,
want to carry on this conversation, but let me just say,
don't think of it historically.
Olam Haba never once means that in any classical rabbinic
Okay,
sense.
that's the way he sees it.
My reading of Maimonides is that he doesn't do it, but I think that we have to have this conversation because if he's in any way true to the inherited tradition, right, then this would represent a radical break with anything that's
But David, what about Rav? Tzadikim Yoshvim Atzaretehem Be'Rogen V'Nanim Yizi V'Ashchina Ein Shotim Ein.
Olam Haba after history. It's after history.
It's at the end
Death is not the time for Olam Haba. Death is merely death. At the end of history comes Olam Haba, according to all rabbinic sources.
Yes, but not according to him. That's just nonsense.
There's a queue. This gentleman has hand up a long time.
Thank you so much. I just want to not pile on, but add in.
Piling on is a penalty in football.
Well, good thing we would never deal with such gosh mystic shit in a place of intellectual intelligence. So no, it seems to me that if Olam Haba is atemporal, then there's no reason actually why a temporal or historical event like death would actually necessitate it. And actually, a perfected intellectual soul could at least begin to achieve some aspects of it because of their, in a sense, I guess, transcendence from physicality through pure intellectual activity.
Absolutely.
And if that's the case, then it seems like actually there might be a correlation between the relation between the physical and the spiritual / intellectual in Maimonides, and it would map exactly to the relation between Olam Haba and Yemot Mashiach. Because if it's the case, because the relationship, it seems, and obviously it's very basic, you can nuance it and do away with it in a number of ways, but the physical for Maimonides is primarily an obstacle to the spiritual and intellectual, and you need to refine the physical and keep it in good tune shape, so that you can do intellectual things so it doesn't get in the way. Similarly, Yemot Mashiach, if it's a time which is pushing, in which people can devote themselves to intellectual activities, is similarly that time in which it is more easily accomplishable to be achieving that purely intellectual end, which would be Olam Haba.
Couldn't put it better myself. I think that's exactly it.
So Ken, it seems that that you might need to add another caveat. Here I'm not disagreeing with you, but I want to draw out something that wasn't clear from the presentation, from the title. It seems that what you're saying is that the rabbis make a distinction between Yemot Mashiach and Olam Haba. Maimonides makes a distinction between Yemot Mashiach and Olam Haba, but these distinctions are vastly different in that Olam Haba is categorically different from Yemot Mashiach, and therefore it seems that given that Olam Haba is a place where categories of space and time don't apply, Olam Haba is indeed, in the most basic sense of the term, utopian. There is no space,
Well,
there is
no,
no topos.
a utopia is, I would take a utopia to mean a perfect social and political environment.
I mean utopian.
But there is no political or social life for him in Olam Haba. It just doesn't exist. There's no Torah.
Got it, okay. I'm using the word utopian in a different sense.
Okay.
Clearly there is no topos. These categories are no longer.
But what about chronos?
What?
What about time?
There's no
There's no
time in
time.
Olam
No,
Haba.
I mean, utopian would not necessitate no time.
So you can say Olam Haba is utopian in that basic sense of the term and achronistic or whatever you want.
It's an eternal, all you can do is contemplate. And because there's no time, you can't make any progress either.
Thank you, Professor Seeskin.